You're tuned in to the MtG Cable cast, where they cover Magic, the Gathering Finance. All right? You don't know about it? You're tuned in right now and get ready to learn some shit. Buckle your seat belts and light a blunt and get ready for the MtG Cable cast. Starring Reptar and Thirsty, them onion head motherfuckers.
Alrighty, guys. Welcome to the newest episode of the Cabal Cast. This one is part 1 of 3. So we've been kind of kicking the can down the road on this one because more and more stuff came out on this topic that we were like, well, we want to do an episode because it's relevant. And eventually we were like, you know what? Fine. We're doing it. We can't wait forever because there's just going to be more and more and more and more. So what are we covering? Well, inflation, recessions, overall economic factors when the economy is in a downturn, and what to do with them. And in this first episode, we're basically just going to cover the general broad stroke stuff. What's inflation? What's a recession? How are they related? Broad strokes, what do you do? That kind of thing. So with that, let's get started.
So basically, to start up at the top, inflation, it's just a word that means the supply and demand. So there is more demand than there is supply for various goods and services, and thus we are looking at a rise in price. Any of you that do your own grocery shopping, that you're not doing Instacart or anything like that, you will have noticed over the past couple of weeks a rise in price of proteins and various produce, because we are still seeing a shortage at the factories producing those products. Same thing if you are adjacent to home building. The cost of copper has been going up for a very long time. The cost of wood, etc., also going up. And so that is essentially inflation. There is just an incredible demand for new housing, and there is not enough supply of anything to keep up with that. Thus, we see inflation there. But inflation is also mainly broad across the economy. We are seeing just a broadly based inflationary economy, and this is kind of what your raise at the end of the year is based off of. If you get 3%, that is not good enough this year.
Yeah.
Not
you
need to be looking at like 6 to 9 right now. Nice. And off of inflation, we can often see a recession, which is succinctly a downturn in an economy for 2 quarters, half a year.
Yep.
And the U.S. government has been kind of reticent to admit that, but when you look at independent sources, and we'll be linking a bunch of Investopedia and Al Jazeera articles, very clearly the U.S. economy, by their own reporting, has essentially said we are in a recession. Between the last 2 quarters, sum total, we've seen a 2.5% decrease in the annualized pace of GDP. 1.9 in Q2 because we're in Q3 right now, and 1.6% in the first 3 months of the year.
And one of the interesting things too is that something else that factors into indicating a recession is retail sales. Because obviously if consumer spending is down, it's because there's not as much luxury money out there. You can't spend as frivolously because you're more concerned about bills, because cost of living, everything else is going up. Non-farm payrolls go into that. Where are jobs at? And we're kind of in an interesting spot right now because we just came off of one of the weirdest 2-year cycles in the history of the American economy. We had almost a depression kind of because of all of the lockdowns and job loss and everything else. And then the gravy train started rolling in and stimulus checks were out and people were just spending money like crazy. And that's what caused the hobby to explode.
Yes, yeah.
And you saw the reserve list spike. You saw any kind of collectible really spike. So now we have that, we have indications of a recession here on the heels of this incredible boom to what I'd consider luxury industries. It's not food, it's not clothing, it's not housing, it's a piece of cardboard with art on it. Nobody needs that. And it's going to be very interesting to see, as the cost of necessary goods go up, how funds are allocated to these hobby industries.
Yeah. And a lot of what we saw previously was people were essentially saving more. They weren't going out, they weren't making unnecessary expenditures, like you were saying. and we were also buffered by rather low interest rates on money lending, although there was really no housing or any large items to spend it on. So people didn't take advantage of that. Not a lot of people were able to during COVID, and instead they saved money. And there are economic reports saying that for the first, I think, either 6 months to a year of the COVID lockdown in the United States, that the most credit card debt in the history of credit card debt in this country had been paid down in that year because people were not making their usual unnecessary overhead spends that they had done previously. That allows them to pocket more and then buy into things like card games like this because they needed something to do at home, but they weren't going out to eat all the time. They were driving less. They weren't looking to just kind of spend as much time outside the house as possible because they couldn't. They were forced to stay in, and that allowed them to save more. There were a lot of people that did take advantage of the very low interest rates. I think we were looking at something around like 2%, which was historically low. And as such, we saw a lot of migration out of large cities into suburbs and urban areas, which kind of plays into this weird kind of housing bubble that some places are in. Because those interest rates were low, it was very easy to make that move. And as we are in this recession, and one of the key factors in the fact that we're being here that people are pointing to is the fact that the U.S. Federal Reserve was very slow at trying to correct everything that's been happening for the last 18 or so months. And we haven't been planning this episode for that long. I'd say we've probably been planning it for about 2 months, but it was really interesting because that bracketed a quarter. Us kicking the can down the road allowed us to see, like, hey, we are actually heading into a recession. The documents are out here. The Fed is starting to react like we would expect, attempting to correct for inflation and a recession.
And that's kind of what prompted us to say, all right, it's time now, because you're starting to get that official acknowledgement. You're starting to, while the signs were there, there's obviously a chance things turn around. And now, no, it's not happening.
Yep.
We're here. Let's go ahead and do it.
Yep.
So with all that, what do you do in a recession?
Yeah. Right now, it seems like the correction that the Fed is making is they are raising interest rates. So it is harder for people to acquire money, but that's basically interest rates on loans. It's not your day-to-day. So they're trying to, again, slow down those large purchases and make people pocket more money so that they can account for what's going on with inflation and allow them to essentially save that money to keep living the way they are. So you can go back to living like you were a year or 2 years ago and kind of live small and buy back into a hobby like this or other hobbies you have at home. Or if you have to and you need to, find funds somewhere, selling out also isn't a bad option either. While the inflation rate is going to be rather high, the interest rates are going to be rather high on loans. We are up to 9 point something percent, I believe. Up a percentage point from a full percentage point from May. That is on your bank loan. But if you're going to be selling a large chunk of reserve list or power because you need the money, that is going to come at a discounted cost because you're selling to somebody else based on market prices. There's not going to be any juice on that loan. Because there is no loan. So I don't think there's really a bad answer here. I think if you're in a spot where you need money, this is not a bad time, and you need a lot of it. This is not a bad time to think about liquidating. You can do so at a decent amount right now. The further we get into a recession, however, it's going to become worse and worse and worse because money is going to become tighter and tighter and tighter.
Yeah, and I think it's something that if you're going to do it, you need to do it at the beginning. Because basically, these prices are only going to keep trending down because people are going to start saving money because they need to buy beef.
Yeah.
They're not going to have as much money out there to do this. So there's two things you can do. If you need the money, you sell now. Because in a couple of months, not only will we be hitting the normal Christmas lull where we see prices depreciate a little bit, we'll be entering the full-on now our economy is actually just in a recession. And if that happens, it's not going to be a good time to sell. It's already a bad time to sell in the winter. It's going to be even worse when this happens. Mm-hmm. The other alternative is If you are not really impacted by it, man, you can make 20 to 30% by
Yes.
buying stuff at retail
Yeah.
and holding it until afterwards. So there's a couple of options there that you have available to you. And the question is, do you want to, how able to protect yourself are you?
Yeah.
Are you able to just sit on stuff?
Mhm.
If so, cool. Sit on it, appreciate a little bit more, that's fine. But if you need to get rid of it, or you're considering, well, maybe I should, now is the time to do it, not in 3 months.
Yeah. I think to protect oneself either on the buy or the sell, now is the time to hawk the market.
Yeah.
You know, understand what you have, understand what you need, either because you want to bring in more or you want to push out some, and understand what's going on in the marketplace. And I think this is the opportune time to really build a knowledge base
Yeah.
and spend time digging around and learning about what's going on in various formats for the cards that you own. If you're sitting on a lot of specs, it's time to take a little more of an aggressive stance if you need to out them.
Yeah.
And pay more attention to that. Alternatively, if you're looking to buy in, in a couple of months, you can probably start picking up Pioneer staples on the cheap if the recession continues. Why? Because those people are done trying to queue for for regionals and that Pro Tour, and we know the next event after that is Standard. So this is kind of a double whammy for those people. Like it's heinous. If I was a Pioneer player and I found out that the next event was going to be Standard, and I needed to buy back into Standard because it's been dead for this long, I would be pissed as hell that I have to sell what I have to from Pioneer to buy back in. As somebody who would be looking to buy in and build a collection to resell later on or stock a store, etc., I think this is a great time for me.
Yeah. I also think one of the interesting side things about this is if you're able to acquire something we've seen as everything is, economies have been affected around the world, is for the first time in like 20 years, the euro is worth as much as the dollar. It's fallen that much. So there's an additional arbitrage opportunity on MKM where some of this stuff is already dirt cheap compared to the US. Odd example, and I just know this because I just bought a couple off the site. MKM has foil Japanese A25 red elemental blasts for about 30 euros. That's buy list in the States. So there are opportunities there, not just in buying stuff at retail, but when you look at some of the fringe consequences of an economic downturn on the global level, national, whatever, you can see that there are ways to exploit it and make a little bit of money.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I definitely think that that's the kind of thing that, we should check it out.
Yeah. When it comes to the global scale, we'll also be putting a link out here. Granted, it's going to be to a last week tonight video, but it does kind of clearly explain what's going on the global scale, especially with Europe, who's currently embroiled in the Ukrainian and Russian war.
Yeah.
Right? The battle that's been raging there since, I think, December, so we're on month 8, and how that has impacted the globe. And everything going on. We are also very strong, the USD to the yen right now. It's about 135 yen to the dollar. I was looking that up, which is historic, I think, as well. Usually we float around 1-to-1, maybe 118 yen to the dollar. So if you're able to buy off of Haruya or Tokyo MtG, whatever you can, also a really good look to pick up from there. But again, this is all about if you can. If you have the ability to move and arbitrage, and it does behoove you to keep an eye on these marketplaces. Japan is picking up in Commander, so there's the opportunity to move Commander staples.
Yep.
The EU still doesn't really do a whole lot with Commander, so bringing them in, is another great idea. Something like Red Elemental Blast is great not only for Legacy but also for Pauper, which is most likely why you were looking for them.
It is,
and I don't think a lot of other locations around the globe really play Pauper as much as people in the US, and I could be dead wrong about this, but it's not like I hear a lot of European people clamoring to play Pauper. Usually it's vintage and old school spin-offs.
Yeah.
So knowing that empowers you to move cards off of MKM. And if you have the opportunity to, go to shows with external vendors, I don't know how often we're going to see Galactus, etc., coming back in because Star City only has another couple events throughout the year. But again, that'll be a good place to look to arbitrage to and from.
Yeah.
From a booth like that. And so I think there are a lot of good ways to protect yourself in this as a player, as a collector, as a financier. Though I think as a player, it is probably the worst.
Yeah, it is definitely players being so much more prone to the whims of the marketplace. It is certainly much more difficult, especially when you have WotC doing WotC things and, we've got, all these reprints, all these format changes, Pro Tour changes. We're going back to a format that hasn't existed for a few years because Arena happened. And that definitely makes it difficult.
Oh, yeah.
I think as a collector and financier, much easier.
Absolutely.
Especially if you're able to pay attention to opportunities to exploit the marketplace. I think that's huge.
Yep. I'm curious to see what's going to happen with some of my locals as they shift from Pioneer to Standard, because I don't know how many of them bought in. Kamigawa brought us some very obvious playables, but they were obvious, so obvious that they make it all the way down to Vintage. So you buy into them. Streets comes out, and aside from Unlicensed Hearse and Ledger Shredder, who bought into what that's going to allow them to continue to play Standard? Like at one point in time, the Grixis Vampire Legend, I think, was all over Standard, but I didn't really know that until I was watching Commander content with somebody that plays Commander.
Yeah.
The Triumphs are on their way up. That was kind of a missed boat if you didn't jump in early, but how much money are players going to have to spend jumping from one format to the next for these single format seasons? Yep. Unsure. And by the time that season rolls around again, there's a really good chance that everything that they bought into previously is out of date.
Yeah.
The nice part about having a quote-unquote qualifier season in like Modern allowed you to play Standard for the rest of the year and not have to worry about, okay, one quarter is going to be Standard, the next quarter is going to be Pioneer, the quarter after that's going to be Modern, the quarter after that's going to be who knows what, but by the time we get there, my Standard cards are almost rotated, and it's been half a year since I had to care about Standard, and everything that's been printed since I've not paid attention to because I had other formats to buy into to keep playing. And I think that's going to be the worst because you have to hold on to your cards for longer than anybody else, which means your opportunity to sell at a decent price gets lower and lower, and you have to buy in, which then kind of hits you with that like inflationary idea of supply and demand. All the other grinders are going to be buying into Standard as well, so get trucked.
Yeah.
Yeah,
it's great.
I don't see a great way for players to come out of this ahead or at a break even unless they do start playing like the finance game a little more and spending a little more money on Standard all the time and pick up cards that they can move to other players in the area that like to crack boxes, like Commander players or what have you. The Invisibles that walk in and just start making trades, or moving and shaking to cards to buy list from trades at F&M or wherever they're playing. And I think that is the best way for a player to protect themselves. Or get a sponsorship from your LGS and just borrow the cards. That's probably the optimal way to do it as a player, but I don't think that opportunity really exists anymore.
No, I think it's gone, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Say la vie.
Yep, exactly. So, as we continue to see a rise in inflation, we see the Fed raise interest rates, and we move further into a recession. What do you expect to see, let's say, more on the collector and financier side of things?
I'd definitely expect a drop and a downturn, and I think there's just overall on prices, particularly at the high end. Not that they'll drop a greater percentage than everything else will. Obviously, a Lotus is going to be a Lotus, and you know what? Stuff like that typically sees like a 5% downturn every winter as we hit Christmas and people unload for Christmas money or whatever. I'd expect you'll see a 10 to 15% downturn in some of that stuff. You'll start to see duels drop.
Yeah.
And I think duels are the barrier, right? If you're worth less than a duel, I don't consider it a financier or collector option. But once you're more than a dual, that's where you'll see that like 10-ish% drop.
Okay.
You may see a lot less in some cards. It may be. I mean, I don't think you'll see fetches drop terribly much, maybe 10 to 15%.
No.
But I think there's definitely some stuff you'll see that'll hit a 30 to 40% that may be in the like, $30 to $50 range. That's really just an EDH staple that it's not like you're going to wake up and it's going to be tanked, but over the next few months, year, whatever, you'll just see a gradual downturn on that stuff until it hits a new floor.
Yeah.
That's my expectation. What about you?
I think that the way you lay it out is really good because you're looking at it more from a micro perspective. I was kind of thinking this at the macro, and I was thinking what I expect to happen as the recession grows deeper and interest rates grow higher, we will see entering the marketplace more high end. People are going to look to shift assets.
Yeah.
And the market will absorb that, but we will see more often than not on Facebook Marketplace or Twitter, buys go up looking to move 5 digits worth of cards a little more often than not, because as I mentioned up top, the people who are going to acquire them aren't going to need to get the loan for them, and the money that you're going to make is going to supplement what you would need to get from a loan to buy a house.
Yeah.
Or another asset like that holds value, that retains value, that will accrue value over time. And the way you pass down generational wealth is not through a collectible, it's through something like a house, through home ownership. And I think that's what that's how I expect to see things kind of move through. The sales that you're talking about, I definitely understand it because people need to live their lives, so they're going to give up the third and the fourth monovault, and they'll just proxy the one because they own it. They can flash it.
Yeah,
right
doesn't
at the
matter.
beginning of the game. Right, it's easy. It's right there. They don't need the overhead. They need to live a life. And that's something I didn't think about, but is very, very real. I just have, like I said, I was thinking of it more from a macro perspective, and I do expect to see, and this is going to sound kind of funny, but a shift in power. And we might see it kind of coalesce across a number of other named entities in time by way of other vendors, up to a handful of people that we might expect that kind of will just gobble up what they can when it's a bear market for them. And we could definitely see that kind of coalesced movement.
Yeah, I definitely think and it's a good point you make about, people selling power to get into houses, because that's something that when the economy is bad, if you want to hold on to your money, you're right. Absolutely, that's how you pass it down, as real estate. And it turns out a couple Lotuses is a pretty good down payment on a lot of stuff. So,
yeah. There's also the move, like, I don't think we'll see people move into like ingots and stuff like that, but there are, or is it like the school of thought that's like, when, if I don't know exactly how it works, but it's like when the economy does X, you can move into like government bonds. When it does Y, you can move into ingots like gold and silver to insulate and kind of like not play a shell game with the money, but put it in a place where it'll be a little safer. And I don't expect stuff like that to happen, but it is something to think about. But I think for me, like I said, that's the expectation. From a player perspective, I don't really know. It's so hard. I'm so removed from having to keep up with what goes on that I actually am worried with a Q2 2023 standard Pro Tour, because we'll be coming out of Pioneer season with sets that people forgot about, and we're going to ask people to begin buying into standard again starting in about a month.
Yeah.
We're recording this at the beginning of August. Yeah. So this episode hits in a couple of days. By the time we're done with this run, we might actually be at the next standard set release. We're going to ask them to buy into 2 standard sets, a third one at the beginning of 2023, and possibly a 4th one at Q2 2023. And I think that's a lot to ask of players. And I don't know if they'll be able to keep up. We might actually see a disappearance of large standard events for a while, unless they can be held on Arena, which is the question I had immediately when I heard about the Standard Pro Tour. It's like, okay, is this just going to be a digital event? And in that case, I think it's a lot easier for players.
Oh, yeah, significantly. You just have to spend all your money on wild cards then.
Exactly. You just buy that $50 bundle that nets you nothing. everybody hates arena and the arena economy, and it's not our spiel, but there's a lot of it out there. The
Yeah.
professor does great stuff. Saffron Olive does great stuff because they're just jamming all the time. And if it's on arena, I think it's easier and better overall. It's much more approachable, and wants to use the business of making money, and that's probably the best ROI they're going to get on a standard event. So that's the hope, because it's better for everyone. But if it is a paper event, I really do not. I don't. Unless there's multiple standard events in the year, like here's a standard regionals and then a standard pro tour in Q4. So you've got two Qs 2 and 4, so people pay attention to standard more often than not. I don't see standard surviving like it used to without that kind of necessary push. But I don't know. I'm not grinding anymore. I don't.
Bad EV.
Exactly. It's terrible EV. So, unless there's anything you expect from a player perspective, I think we're good to call this episode to a close. And our next episode will be discussing more from the LGS side of things, what's going to happen. So, we will catch you next week. But until then, we are at MtG Cabalcast on Twitter, Facebook, Patreon, and YouTube. If you want to get in touch with us individually, I am at Halt. I am Reptar on Twitter. You are
At Thirsty Sizzler.
We'll see you next week.